In 2021, Turo announced that they would be going public, and just a couple of days ago, they reached a really big milestone in this filing with the release and filing of their S-1 paperwork. Now, this is really big for a few different reasons. Number one is it brings Turo that much closer to actually being a publicly traded company. Number two, it releases some key data of whether or not hosts will get access to shares pre-IPO, meaning before anybody else can invest. And number three, it gives us a glimpse in Turo and the financials of Turo that we've never really been able to see before. And that's exactly what I want to talk about in this video. In this video, I'm going to be breaking down some of the key bullet points that you should be looking for and you should be aware of in this S-1 filing. Now, there's a ton to go over, so we're only going to be going over a portion of it today, but I'm going to be breaking down exactly what you should know. So let's get started. Now, for those of you who don't know what an IPO or going public is, and for those of you who don't know what an S-1 filing is, let's go over some of the basics before we dig into what I really want to talk about. Now, IPO stands for Initial Public Offering. What this means is it's whenever a company goes from being a privately held company to being a publicly traded one. And it means that a company can now be traded on the stock market, and thus everyday average people can buy shares of this company, and thus they own a portion of that company. Think Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, all of these companies at one point in time had to file for an IPO, and that is the point in time in which they went from being privately held to publicly held. This is what Turo announced last year that they would be doing. They would be going from being a privately held company to a publicly traded one. But before you can do this, you have to file a ton of paperwork. There has to be a bunch of audits. There has to be a lot of financial analytics done to your company. There is simply a ton that needs to be done. One of the biggest pieces of the puzzle is the S-1 filing, and this is basically a filing of a bunch of different types of paperwork that allows for people to get a glimpse on how the company is operating, what the financials are of the company, what the background is, how the company has progressed, different risk factors associated with the company. It truly is a way to kind of peel back the curtain and see what is going on behind closed doors. And that is what Turo released just a couple of days ago. You see, up until this point, and still currently today in January 2022, because of the fact that Turo is privately held by individuals and investment groups, there is no obligation for Turo to tell you and I how they are operating financially. Turo doesn't have to let us know how much they're making or how much they're losing. Turo doesn't have to know what they're struggling with, how they're operating. Yeah, they do occasionally give hosts a glimpse into what this looks like, but it certainly isn't something that they have to do, and it definitely isn't something they do frequently. But as a publicly traded company, you absolutely have to release all of this data because you have to make sure that your shareholders or potential investors have the data and the information that they need in order to make an educated investment into your company. So there is a real big shift in the clarity of the financials of a business whenever it goes from being private to being public. And this is the exact shift that Turo is currently going through during their IPO process. But the thing is, this S-1 filing is really large. It's pretty significant, and there's a ton of information in there. In full disclosure, I have not read the entire thing yet, but I am working my way through it slowly but surely. So in this video, what I really want to focus on is two different things. I want to focus on, number one, the finances of Turo and some of the key points that they spoke about in this S-1 filing. And then number two, I want to talk about what this means for hosts and how hosts can have access to pre-IPO shares. But before we dig in, if you guys could do me a huge favor, and if you could hit the like button and hit the notification bell for the YouTube algorithm, I would greatly appreciate it. This helps let YouTube know that you guys are enjoying my content, and thus they push my content out to a new audience. Also, if you guys use the code IPO, you can get $25 off of my car sharing masterclass. This is my online course that teaches you guys how to run a car sharing business with the same business model I use. And lastly, if you guys are interested in learning more about car sharing and joining my private Patreon group, there is a link to that down in the description below as well. This is the S-1 filing. You can see here that it was filed on January 10th, 2022, so just a couple of days ago. Like I've said a few times so far, it is really large, really significant, so I'm not going to be going over all of it in this video. But if you scroll down here, you can see that it says our host community, how some of the metrics of Turo is doing, what are some of the key points, and you can see here it says 1.1 billion plus host earnings since inception, 161,000 active vehicles, 1,300 makes and models, and 7,500 cities nationwide or worldwide. Then you can see here how they actually define active, which is interesting because this is actually a question that I had whenever I was going through the S-1 filing. What do they categorize as active? Because there are a lot of cars on Turo that have 0 trips or even ones that just have like 1 trip. And they categorize active or define active as of 12 months ended September 30th, 2021. We count the number of active vehicles and active guests as vehicle listings and guests respectively, with at least one trip in the trailing 12-month period of time. And so basically, if you've had one trip in the last 12 months and you are active either as a guest or as a host, which, if I'm being honest, that seems to be a little bit generous because there are a lot of cars on Turo that have like one trip and one trip only, but that's neither here nor there, I suppose. Then if we scroll down to page 4, you can see that there is some information regarding who their hosts are, how many hosts they have, and they really break hosts into 3 different categories. You have the consumer hosts, you have the small business hosts, and you have the professional hosts, which they categorize as people with 10 or more cars. And then it also states that as of September 30th, 2021, over 85,000 active hosts use the platform with 160,000 active vehicles. Then on page 6 and 7, it does a very similar thing, but from the guest perspective, and it goes over the fact that there is 1.3 million guests and booked over 7.4 million days on our platform. And it goes over to talk about the different types of guests that Turo hosts. So local getaways, destination vacations, business travel, car replacements, flexible month-to-month access, and it goes on from there. And then it talks about how the platform supports their guests and some of the benefits to guests. Now, there's financial data sprinkled throughout this filing. For example, you see some on page 22, on page 23. If you scroll down to page 28, there's some more information on losses as well. But it really, in this section here, focuses on the fact that Turo historically has had a lot of losses. They have not been a profitable business thus far. You can see here, if you go to page 28, it kind of provides some context as to what's behind these losses. And it says, we have a history of net losses in all years since our inception, anticipate increasing our operating expenses in the future, and may not achieve or maintain profitability in the future. We have incurred net losses in all years since our inception. We incurred net losses of $97.1 million and $98.6 million in the years ended December 31st, 2020 and 2019, respectively, and $129.3 million and $51.7 million in the 9 months ended September 30th, 2021 and 2022. And as of December 31st, 2020 and September 30th, 2021, we had an accumulated deficit of $414.7 million and $544 million. And then it goes on to say that they expect their operating expenses to significantly increase over the next couple of years due to the fact that they want to support their hosts, they want to incentivize people to join the platform, they want to make sure that their platform is innovative. Basically, they're saying we plan on investing a lot into the business to improve the business, and because of that, our operational expenses will end up increasing. One sort of interesting snippet that's on this page is the excerpt that says, we may be found to be subject to liability for the activities of hosts and guests, which could harm our reputation, increase our operating costs, and materially and adversely affect our business, results of operations, and financial condition. I think that's an interesting excerpt because it's basically Turo admitting to the fact like, hey, our hosts and our guests are our best assets, but they also are our greatest liability as well. And though we need them to grow our business, they may also be the cause of us losing money and increasing our own liabilities. So I just thought that that was an interesting thing to include here. I think that it's absolutely true. The host and the guest is definitely a double-edged sword for Turo, and obviously they're aware of that, but I just thought it was interesting to read it from this filing itself. The filing then goes on to talk about competitors in this industry, so traditional car rental agencies as well as competitors in the peer-to-peer space. It also goes on to talk about how the pandemic and COVID-19 has affected the business growth. And then it has an extremely lengthy section talking about the risks associated with the business. And this section alone goes from page 25 to page 78, and it goes over all these different types of risks, from car sharing being a new industry and thus they can't predict their earnings, to having to provide support to hosts or else hosts will leave, to having to abide by new laws and evolving laws in states, city, as well as the federal level. It basically breaks down paragraph by paragraph different risks associated with this industry, with Turo, and with this business as a whole. But now let's dig into what you guys actually want to talk about, which is whether or not hosts will have access to shares before everybody else. Now, this is something that Airbnb did, and I thought it was extremely cool that they did it. And I remember whenever Turo initially announced that they were going public, my first thought was, I wonder if Turo is going to do the same thing that Airbnb did. Now, what Airbnb did is they allowed for hosts to have access to shares before Airbnb officially went public, and thus they were able to get it at the proper IPO price rather than at the price that you would get it if you were trying to buy it like the day it went public on the market, which is oftentimes significantly higher. Because of this, a lot of hosts were able to make a lot of money on IPO day, which was really great to hear. And whenever Turo announced that they were going public, the first thought that I had in my mind was, I wonder if they're going to do the same thing. And it looks as though they are doing it, which is great to hear. Now, you can actually read about this on page 15, and it's called the Directed Share Program. It says, at our request, the underwriters have reserved up to 5% of the shares of common stock offered by this prospectus for sale at the initial public offering price through a directed share program. And this would go to eligible hosts and eligible guests and certain individuals identified by our officers and directors. Eligible hosts consist of hosts who have met the performance criteria to become all-star hosts, reside in the United States or the United Kingdom, had between January 1st, 2021 and November 30th, 2021 completed a trip as a host, and as of November 30th, 2021 had at least 95% of rated trips earned 5 stars. Eligible guests consist of guests who have met the criteria for our Insider Rewards program, reside in the United States, and have had between January 1st, 2021 and November 30th, 2021 completed a trip as a guest. So the short answer is yes, you can get access to IPO pricing stock, and you have to be an all-star host. You have to have 95% of your trips be 5-star ratings. You have to have at least 1 trip, and you have to also be either in the UK or in the United States. Now, all in all, this is what we know about these IPO shares for Turo hosts, and this probably will be all the information we learn for the time being. I've heard from other hosts that were active on Airbnb at the time that they went public is that how it worked was like an Airbnb representative reached out to them, let them know that they qualified, and then they had to follow a certain steps in order to get those IPO shares. So it's not going to be the same process that it would be if you were to just buy stock on your TD Ameritrade app or your Webull app or Robinhood app. It is going to be slightly different, but you should have access to this if you're somebody who meets all of the pieces of criteria. But like always, you guys, if you have any questions, comments, if you have anything to add, I would love to hear it. So make sure to leave a comment down below. And while you guys are at it, make sure to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the notification bell. And I will see you guys in the next video.